Well, we're going to tackle the question now, why is there so much evil and suffering in the world? It's actually one of the biggest questions that people ask, because if you're awake and reading the newspaper and watching people's lives around you, you know that pain happens in this world. Earthquakes happen and floods strike and kids get beaten and wars happen and fires break out. And you look at all of the terrible evil in this world and you say, God, why don't you do something about it? And why would you allow there to be so much evil and suffering in the world? Well, in this little clip, we're going to ask that question in a very literal sense. Like, God, why is there so much evil and suffering in the world? Why is there the volume that there is right there? And I think one of the easiest ways to get a picture of what this looks like would be to draw a picture of all of the evil, a graph of all of the evil that there is in the world. So if this is your graph and you look on the top part of this graph, and that just represents all evil and suffering. And this is the level that it is right here, right now, today. You put all those things together, that's what that looks like. Sometimes people ask the question, God, why don't you take care of some of that evil and suffering? Why don't you eliminate a piece of it? And so let's just say God decided tonight at the stroke of midnight that he would erase the worst 10% of all of the evil that's out there, the worst 10%. And let's just say, maybe this is nuclear war and AIDS and child abuse. Let's just say that's what the worst 10% is these days, and abuse. And God got rid of that at the stroke of midnight, and it was no longer there. Well, if that's no longer there, then let me ask you, what kind of a question would we be asking when we're left with all of this evil that's still left in the world? I think the question that we'd be asking at this point is the question, God, why don't you get rid of some of the suffering and evil that there is there in the world? And let's just say God said, okay, I'll get rid of some of the suffering and evil that there is in the world. And this time it's going to be, say, cancer, and it's going to be flooding, tsunamis, and whatever else the next most evil kind of a thing would be. Let's say all war. God eliminates all war. God gets rid of all of these things, and that 10% is gone. If we're left there, we'll be asking the same question again, won't we? God, why don't you get rid of the worst evils in the world? Because we wouldn't be aware of these evils that are not existing in our existence until you wind up going all the way down here to the bottom, and you say, hey, God, why don't you get rid of, the worst evils, which at this point is like telemarketers and root canals and excessive taxes. God, why don't you get rid of those kinds of things? And eventually you get down to the bottom. Or maybe you'd ask the question, God, why don't you get rid of all of this bottom part of the evil? But let me ask you this. If God were to get rid of all evil at the stroke of midnight tonight, which one of us would still be here tomorrow to experience life on planet Earth? If God got rid of all evil, I know I'd be destroyed. You probably would as well. So the interesting thing about this graph is no matter how tall the graph is, no matter how much evil that there is in the world, we'd be asking the same question, God, why is there so much suffering and evil? As a matter of fact, I could imagine this graph being much taller. I could imagine a lot of evil things. As a matter of fact, we can remember some evil things in our history, like Stalin, who committed genocide against 10 million people, or the Spanish influenza that just wiped out massive amounts of people, millions and millions of people, when it went unchecked in 1919 and 1920. And you could imagine all kinds of terrible atrocities and other diseases that would wear away at the human soul and the human condition that would be worse than anything that we're experiencing here today. Things could be a lot worse. And part of the question you have to ask is, God, why do you allow so little suffering and evil? I mean, one question is, why not less? But another question is, why not more? And is God, in fact, holding back evil from striking this world? One of the interesting things to note as you look through the pages of the Bible is that God is called a protector or a shield or a fortress, all kinds of places. One place is 2 Samuel chapter 22, verse 31. As for God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord is flawless. He is a shield for all who take refuge in him. He could be a shield, a fortress, a deliverer. Whatever God is called, what's implied there is that God is protecting you from some kind of evil that could be existing. And the truth is, if you think about how tall this graph could be, it could reach all the way to the ceiling. It could reach all the way up to the sky of the potential evil that God is not allowing, that God is holding back in this world. So God is, in fact, holding back some key amounts of evil from this world. And no matter how much evil there is or is not in this world, we'd be asking the same question over and over again. Now, one question that we haven't been able to answer is the question, why is there any evil at all? Why did God create a world in which there could be evil? And we'll leave that question for another video clip.